Thank you, Madam Carla, for your intervention. Our third speaker, Mr. Richard Borchell, from Trent Center for Research and Advisory. Mr. Richard, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks to the Ecumenical Alliance and to Trends for this opportunity. Sorry, and to the Arab Federation as well. I'm going to take my 10 minutes to cover some of the international human rights law issues related to media and the way it's approached, just because in the current environment, we're seeing arguments about human rights being either or. There's no in-between. Yet, all international human rights instruments do have an in-between. Very few rights are absolute. Therefore, freedom of expression in particular, which is most directly connected to the media, is not an absolute right either. However, we've seen, as we've already heard, that in the situation involving Al Jazeera, quite often the response has been that media freedom is much more important than issues of hatred, incitement, and very problematic language and behavior by the media outlet. So my emphasis from the outset is on the responsibility of the media. All human rights instruments provide that one cannot rely upon the rights, freedoms, and guarantees protected in that instrument to impede upon the rights of others. Now, it's a very difficult space to work in, but the bottom line is we just can't argue media freedom, freedom of expression, no matter what. We do have to ask some serious questions. For those that are interested, Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights says that the freedom of expression carries with it special duties and responsibilities. European Convention on Human Rights, Article 10, provides the same. You cannot be using these freedoms to damage others, and so we need to look at the role of the journalism, the role of media, and how they're engaging in this activity. Plus, I would also put out there to the media, there's obligations and ethical responsibilities upon all media personnel. Issues such as humanity, issues such as objective approaches, and issues such as accountability. What we're seeing quite often from a number of media outlets is we're just reporting what's happening. If somebody else reacts to that, that's not our problem. No. Media ethics requires that all journalists and news outlets engage in accountable behavior. Now, I want to throw in a few more examples that my colleagues have already covered to help sort of build upon this issue of media responsibility and looking at Al Jazeera's behavior. Because like I said, right now we're in this very strong debate that no, Al Jazeera is fine, everybody else has a problem with it. But I'd point you to the Canadian government, which is one of the few, if only, Western states that said, no, Al Jazeera Arabic cannot freely broadcast in Canada. Their concerns were on anti-Semitic speech, hate speech, behavior that ran contrary to the dignity, rights, and reputations of others. It is the only Western state that has put limitations on it. From what I've discovered in talking to different individuals across Europe and in the US is this sounds very problematic, but since Al Jazeera Arabic is in Arabic, it's not a problem. But I mean, as Carl just pointed out, it is becoming a very large problem. And I think the regulatory authorities need to look more closely at it. When we see groups like, when we see Al Jazeera adopting Hamas's media strategy after the 2014 Gaza conflict, we can see there's direct links between designated terrorist groups and the media outlet. That cannot be allowed to continue. But what I also want to point out are just a couple of small anecdotal examples, but to me, these examples are extremely important. Individual by the name of Samir al-Kantar, member of Hezbollah, he was responsible for the killing of the Haran family in 1979. This was a horrific issue. Kantar killed the dad. He then beat the daughter to death on the beach rocks. The mother was in such fear that she suffocated her own child. Now, Samir was put in jail. He was released as part of a prisoner swap. Those are politics that we're not going to get into. Al Jazeera covered it. Now that is a newsworthy issue, a prisoner release, a prisoner swap, fine. However, Al Jazeera then brought this individual onto their news channel. He was called brother, he was celebrated, he was welcomed, and the Al Jazeera host said that he deserved more recognition for his actions. Now, this is just borders on disgusting on a personal level, but on issues of incitement, on the issues of furthering hate, this is such an obvious example. And Al Jazeera just walked away from it. Another example where a Jordanian soldier was responsible for the Island of Peace massacre. We saw 7 schoolgirls killed, 6 more wounded. Again, he was released as part of the wider geopolitics of the issue. But then he was interviewed on Al Jazeera. He was feted as a hero. They made it very clear. It wasn't just sort of say, this individual was released, what do you think of the politics? He was feted as a hero. He then went on to talk about how the Jews, the Israelis, constitute human garbage. This garbage must be removed. He called upon God and others to burn this human garbage. Now, as I've discussed in places like Brussels and London, if I go outside here in Geneva and say this, I will be arrested. I will be brought in for questioning. But yet Al Jazeera as a media outlet somehow seems to get away with it, as it were, and we have to ask some more difficult questions. Plus, we have other issues that don't directly relate to the hate speech, but really problematic in the current environment of terrorism and extremism, especially involving Daesh. A 2014 debate on Al Jazeera, we had I don't want to use the word nutcase, but a nutcase individual who kept praising the caliphate, kept praising Daesh, kept saying the caliphate will return, behead all infidels, lowlifes, and criminals. The Al Jazeera host just encouraged it. You can see the clip. He just sat there and just let this guy talk away. Now, to use an example, we have issues like the BBC who are almost too impartial, and they would not allow something like this to happen. They have both sides argue. You'd expect the interviewer to at least stop, question, or confront this person for it. The other one that I find quite worrying, especially when it comes to the global issues, is the extent to which Al Jazeera gave Youssef al-Qaradawi, the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, his own platform once a week to come out and just talk about political Islam. Now, all right, people might argue, well, that's fine, he can do that, but no, the speech used was anti-Semitic, very hateful, and things that Europeans would not allow. When an individual gets on the national media and says the Holocaust was a great idea, but Hitler couldn't finish the job, that is not acceptable. That is not responsible media. So by giving this individual this platform on a regular basis, he became legitimized. His sort of toxic speech was very problematic. These examples aren't the only examples we have. We can keep looking for more. We can look back in history. It is a real problem. And as a human rights issue, we have to ask the question. Media speech and freedom is important. It is necessary in our societies. But do we let it just go in a way that incites others to engage in violence, to engage in hatred, to engage in threats to international peace and security? Glorifying terrorism is a crime in a majority of Western countries. We need to start applying these standards to the media, not just in the Middle East, but to the global level. Thank you.
Thank you.